Okay guys, so I was well impressed with the work people were doing in the labs and with their slot machines and games and things. Lots of people were trying ambitious things and it wasn't working out, but they didn't care. They were, happy out to give it a lash, and I think people did some very good work. So I was pleased with the way that turned out. What we're going to do today now is that's the way to do this module, by the way. I give you something and then you pick it up and run with it and change it around and see what happens and see what you can do. Okay? That's definitely the way to do this module. I mean, if I'm going to give you code, like for a while there you were typing stuff in, but I mean I won't give you much typing to do. Generally, like the code I use in class, I will give it to you and you can have it to take away. So I mean, taking that code and running it and saying, oh yeah, it worked, I mean, that's probably not a whole lot of use, So you need to actually take it and modify it and change things around and see what you can do with it, and had a bit of imagination and see how far you can push it. Certainly some of you tried to push what I gave you too far, in that you were trying to do things that you simply couldn't do with the technology as I had explained it. When you're using document.write, what you're doing is, and what we did so far was, we were building up a web page piece by piece, and those document.writes were, the output of those was being interpreted then as HTML. But once the page is so you were deciding on the fly how you were going to draw that page. But once the page was drawn, it was done. Okay? You can't really then, once the page is drawn, go back and do some more document.writes in the code. That'll start writing a new page. So some people had problems with that. I said on the day, kind of in the labs, as a rule of thumb, you can't kind of do buttons and document.writes in the same program. They won't work out. And that was what was going on. So what I'm going to show you today, we're not going to use document.writes at all. And in fairness, probably after today, you won't ever use document.writes anymore either. So what we're going to look at now is, once a page is drawn, how do you tweak a page that's already been written? So with the document.writes, you were deciding on the fly how the page was going to be written. So it was written differently, like depending on the time of day, for example, or depending on those random numbers, you got a different page. But once it was done, it was done. Now what we're going to look at is how you modify a page that's already there, that already exists, that's already been written. How do you tweak that? So the first thing we're going to look at is a rollover. Now, I imagine in 10 years' time, I'll find the copy of this class on a backup disk somewhere, if it's still working. And I'd be saying, oh, God be with the days before we all had everything in the cloud. And, God be with the days when we had rollovers. Okay? So rollovers, when you roll the mouse over something, it changes. Now, a grammar has kind of developed around web pages where if you roll over something and it changes, it means it's like clickable onable. So it's a way of sort of saying, hey, you can click on me. I'm a navigation thingamajig. And if you click on me, I'll take you somewhere. If you have an iPod or an iPad or an iPhone or a Galaxy Yokamajig or whatever, I mean, there's no such thing as a rollover on a touch device. It's not like you have your finger sort of, I'm nearly touching it, but not quite yet. And the machine responds. It doesn't. Do you know what I mean? You're touching something or you're not. So when you can have a rollover on a desktop machine where you have a cursor and a mouse, there's no such thing as a rollover, with your finger. Maybe in 20 years' time, the rollover will come back. I mean, I see the rollover dying out now slowly. Do you know what I mean? Even though there aren't, you would think sometimes that the iPad was the only computer left on the planet. But certainly, it's changing the way people design things. And if it doesn't do rollovers, well, why would Certainly, it never made sense to design a website where you had to have rollovers working in order for the navigation to work. That was always a bad idea. But now if you have such a site, it's simply useless to someone on an iPad. And there are people probably who spend money and you want to get their money, so you'll do things their way. Just while I'm speculating, perhaps in 20 years, when you're at a web page, if you look at something, it might go, ooh, I'm clickable onable, and it senses that you're looking at it. and we might have the eyeball rollover or something, you know. But for now, it's when you roll over the mouse over something, you can make it change. So if the cursor goes over this here, it changes. And if you put the cursor back, it changes back. Okay? So you often go to a website where once you put the cursor over something, you know, it tells you that it's clickable on it, and you might click and might go somewhere. Okay? So what we're going to look at is how you do a rollover. But that's all with the caveat that perhaps rollovers aren't really as cool as we used to think they were. Okay? They're not as useful. I mean, I think they're kind of going out of fashion. Imagine if you could, I mean, you could probably do some sort of analysis in Google where you could see how many websites use rollovers, you know, and if you tracked it over time, perhaps it's in decline. Or I could be wrong, but that's my theory anyway. So the important point though about a rollover is that that page is drawn, and then in response to some action the user makes on the page changes in some way. And we're not drawing a new page. We're not drawing a different page. We're tweaking the page that's already there. And that's a very important distinction from the page you were generating dynamically using document.write. Okay? And so what we use is a thing called the document object model, which can be very complicated, but needn't be. So let's have a look at the code here now. So here we have code here that's creating a new image object. Right? So there's an image object being created there, and we're giving it the name good. Okay? And then we're saying that the source property of this object is colingood.jpg.
So this is the very same as a tag attribute.
Almost. Very often, most of the time in fact, the attribute name in the document object model would be the attribute in the HTML. You would think it would be the same thing all the time, you know, but it's not. But most of the time it is. But certainly it's the same concept. So what you're doing is you're using the JavaScript code to modify the properties of the object. Like most of the time what you'll be doing is you'll be modifying some of the CSS properties of the object. And the names don't always match up, but most of the time they do. Okay? So I think the answer is yes. Here we're creating a new image object, and we're giving it the name evil. Okay? And then we're saying evil.src is, so this S property, the source property of this object is evilcolin.jpg. So now we have two objects, and we have altered their SRC properties. We haven't done anything with them yet. Now here we have actually, which is just a bog standard image tag. So we have our img, src, and we have our width and our height and our alt. And then we have some extras. So we've given it an ID. Okay? Did you let him in? Thank you. Hello. Bob. It's your first class of the day. Isn't my big lie in? No. So here we have this on mouse over property. Sorry, an on mouse over event, what I mean. So in JavaScript you have events, and these are usually triggered by the user. So when the mouse rolls over this image, okay, this code here will be executed. Now, very often when you have an event, all you're doing is calling a function that you have stored somewhere. Okay? So mostly, like, this is short, so we can put it in here, because it's really just a one-liner. But for anything more than one line, you want to declare a function and call that function. So here we're saying, take the source property of the object called face in this document. No, the object called face happens to be this image tag that we're in. It needn't be, but that's what we're talking about. And change that to evil.source. So in this document, there's a thing called face. It has a source property. I want you to set that to the source property of evil, which would have the effect of changing the image source to colonevil.jpg.
So the document.face.
Mm-hmm.
What's the face part of it?
The face is the name of the thing I'm talking about, and it has that name because I gave it that name in the ID there. The important point is you could actually, when you roll over one image, change something else. Now that'd be fairly freaky for the user, but like you have that option. This is just code going in here. But what this code happens to be doing is it's changing the source property of this image, which happens to be the image we're talking about. We have a mouse out event, which says that in this document there's an object called face. I wanted to change its source property to the source of good. So document.face.src is assigned good.src. Just as a complete aside while I think of it, I probably didn't stress it enough, but in JavaScript, the assignment statement is 1 equals, and then the Boolean operator to see if two things are the same is equals equals. Okay. So in reality, I guess we're looking at 3 images on this page. We're looking at the first image, the original image that was in the image tag. When you roll over, you get another one, and when you roll off, you get another one. But it just so happens that the one we used for the roll off was the one we started with in the first place. So when this event is triggered, the source property of this image is changed. Now, there is actually an easier way, okay? But I'll tell you why it's not as good. This code here causes the browser to download colongood.jpg and store it somewhere. And this code here causes the browser to download colonevil.jpg and store it somewhere. Okay? And doing it this rather long way means that there's no delay when you do the rollover. Now, it's arguable what the delay might be in today's modern super duper mega web thing, right? Certainly not that long ago, you know, to download an image at least maybe took a second anyway. Now this is quite a small image, but if you were, you could write code that just says, you know, document.face.source equals colongood.jpg. Yeah, but it's only until you say that does the browser go and get colonevil.jpg from the server. And someone told me not 5 minutes ago, actually is that time already? Okay, it was more than 5 minutes ago, that also every time you do it, it would go and get it again that it doesn't store it in memory if you do it that way. I'm not sure if that's true, or if not, well, no, actually. I'm not sure I understood exactly what the person was saying. I'm sure this person knew what he was talking about. So basically, if you do it another way, when you do the rollover, there might be a time lag where it goes to download it and get it. Okay, so that's why we do it this rather long way. As it happens, until very recently, doing it the short way simply wouldn't have worked at all. But with newer browsers, you can do that. You can do it the shorter way, but you should be aware that there could be a delay. Okay, so that's modifying the page after it's been drawn. And you know, this document.structure here, you're going to see a lot of now. You know, you're going to have nightmares now some morning. The alarm is going to go off and you're going to go, oh no, it's the document.alarm, the document.alarm. You know, like it's going to be document.everything from now on. Okay, so here we are using what's called the document object model, the DOM. And this is basically a hierarchy that has the structure of the document in a way that the JavaScript can get at it and change it. One of the problems web programmers had was that until recently, Microsoft's document object model was different from the standard document object model. And so you would have to do things in your code like, well, if this is Microsoft, then do document.images.face.source, and else do document.face.source, you know. But Microsoft is on board now with the standard. Of course, that doesn't mean that all of Microsoft's customers, you know, have upgraded. I mean, lots of people don't even know they have a browser, let alone that they should upgrade it, you know. So it may be that if you do something like this and you run it on an old machine, the rollovers wouldn't work properly, for example. I don't propose, though, that we get into the business of coding for the legacy people, you know.
Code to the standard, right? You want to code to the actual standard.
We'll code to the standard, and even if there are like millions of people out there with lousy browsers, well, you know, maybe by the time you graduate, you know, they won't be a problem, okay? But certainly, even last year, if you were doing this in a lab, you would have had to make sure you used Firefox instead of Internet Explorer. You know, so when you are doing this, make sure you use a new Internet Explorer rather than an old one, because in an old one it will be different. But I don't propose to ever again discuss the issues with, you know, old Microsoft browsers, irrespective of how many users there may be. Do you know? Now, let's look now at a variant then of the slot machine. Okay, and I think in this tiny example here, actually, we have the whole essence of what this module is about, right? So I think almost everything we're going to do is in this example. We're just going to do a bit more. But in this example now is the nugget of everything that's in this module. Okay? Wow, that got your attention. Okay, so some of this looks very familiar now at this stage, okay? So you can see here we're generating the random number for our slot machine. And here, this now is like the rollover thing we did. Okay, we're creating a new image object and we're giving it the name spin slot 1. Okay? Remind me to ask you to ask me what's wrong with this when I'm finished explaining it. And so then if the random number is 1, I'm saying set the source of that to bar. If it's 2, I'm saying set the source to cherry.jpg. If it's 2, set the source to lemon. And if it's 3, set it to pear. So there's nothing there that should surprise you. But having done your own slot machine, you'd say, geez, Con, that's a bit thick now. Could you not have constructed the file name from the random number? You know, called them thing 1, thing 2, thing 0, thing 1, thing 2, and thing 3. You might have made your life easier. And probably would have. So this is a bit longer than it needs to be. But everybody get the idea. So you might have had this in your slot machine anyway, something like that. But you would probably consider this inefficient. Okay? Now, here then, we're saying, oh yeah, so this image here, we'll see later in the HTML when we get to the bottom of the page, is called, we've given it the name, the ID, slot1. Okay? So we're saying document.slot1.source. I want the source of this image here, I want the source to be the same as this, which will turn out to be either bar.jpg, cherry.jpg, lemon.jpg, or pear.jpg, whatever it turns out to be. Happy enough? Kind of happy? No, we just done that then 3 times. Okay? No. And now, here's an interesting part, okay? I think for you to win here, they all have to be 0. And 0 is a bar. Okay, so if you get 3 bars, you... Oh, sorry, yeah, you get any bar, you win. Okay. Any bar and you win. So if any one of them is a bar, you win the prize, okay? So the logic isn't that, it's obviously not much of a slot machine anyway, but, you know. So if any one of them is the bar, you win the prize. Now, what's interesting is how you tell the person what the prize is, okay? That's what's interesting to us. So let's go down to the HTML. Here we have our image tags. We've given them slot 1, slot 2, and slot 3. Okay? So that's what they're called, so we can call them by name. Now, this here is very interesting and very important. I'm going to actually reload the page. So you see this text there just says blah, blah, blah. No. I've given this text, this div here, okay? I've given that div an ID, and I've called it some text. Now putting that ID attribute in the tag lets me talk about that div by name. So imagine now if you have in your page, you have image tags and you have divs and you've spans and you've H1s and you've all sorts of things. Imagine if you talk about any one of them by name in the code. Imagine the things you could do. Right? So I'm going to do something now to that div, okay? So I'm saying document get element by ID. So this function here says, look, give me the thing there now called some text. There's a thing in this document called some text. That's what I'm talking about. This get element by ID is great because the document object model is actually a tree with like the HTML document at the top, and then you've all the pieces. And you could actually kind of visualize it as a tree. And there's all this code you can use to navigate through the tree and stuff and do all sorts of things. And that's very complicated. But if you can just call something by name, you know, I'm talking about that thing there, the thing called this. That's the simplest way, really. I mean, you can do very fancy things with the document object model in the tree, and you can create paragraphs that weren't there before and all sorts of things. But we're going to keep it nice and simple. So there's a thing in this document called some text, and I'm going to change some of its properties. Now, that some text, that div, has an inner HTML property, which is the HTML that's in it, right? And I'm changing that to yippee. So I'm saying this document has a thing in it called some text. I want you to take the HTML inside in that, so what it actually says, and I want you to change it to yippee, which gives us then this. Okay? So you can actually use JavaScript to change the text of the web page after it's been drawn. So imagine the possibilities. In the code, you can totally redesign the page. So you can have great fun with, changing the visible property of things. You can change the color of things, but you can make them visible and invisible. Imagine if there's something you can set in CSS, then you can actually access that from the JavaScript and change it. So you could, for example, have a thing on a form. You put in an RGB color code, hit whatever, hit a button, and that could change the color of the page to that color. Anything you can set in the CSS, you can change.
Any attributes of any object.
Any attributes of any object you can change in the JavaScript. But not only that, you can even change the contents. It's not just that you can change the color of a paragraph, you can even change what the paragraph says. So with that inner HTML there, we've dynamically changed that blah 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 text to yippee. And if you don't win, we change it to sorry you lose. So using JavaScript to modify the appearance of a page after it's been written is pretty much what this module is all about. I'm searching my brain for, it's like this only, with more stuff, and I'm trying to think of examples of the stuff, and I can't even think of them, This is it really. This is the module, do you know what I mean? It's not much harder than that.
So we can get the pass.
Yeah. I mean, the logic is probably going to be more complex than, is one of these things equal to 0? And the things you're going to be doing are probably going to be more complex than just changing the inner HTML of some code. But for the most part, this is it.
Do you watch CSS?
No.
No.
Only insofar as to look up what the thing is to change it. So you might have a div, this code here is a div, right? You might decide that if you win, when you say yippee, you're going to change the background color of the div to red, and you're going to change the border property to one of those fancy CSS borders. So you might be looking up more properties. The decisions you might be making about when you're going to do things might be more elaborate. But you know what? It's not a whole lot more than is here. No. Any questions on that?
What was wrong?
Yeah.
No. So what's wrong with this? Can anyone tell me? Why did we go to the trouble of doing it the long way? If you were able to, for example, manipulate the properties directly, right? And I was saying to you, but that's a bad idea. You shouldn't just say, you shouldn't just down in the code say, well, actually, of course, here you kind of have to do it anyway. Well, one of the problems with this is that Actually, no. I was right. I was right all along. Okay. See, one of the problems I anticipated was that if you're only assigning these JPEGs to this when the code is clicked, when the button is clicked, then it's going to be a delay where they'll have to be downloaded, you know, because that's the first time they're being used. Like, they're not being assigned when the page is loaded, which is what you want to do. When someone loads the page, while you're at it, you're going to get all the images you might need. And then you can go use them. That's true. But also, you can't really, like, the decision about what you're going to assign to what can't really be made any earlier than when you click the button. Now, what you could do is you could have a cherry.source is assigned cherry.jpg, and bar.source is assigned bar.jpg, and lemon.source is assigned lemon.jpg, and do that when the page loads, and then here say spin slot1.source equals lemon.source.
Like the previous example, we'd call it good and the evil.
Yeah, you don't want to, so you could download them in advance. No. Feel free to erase the last 3 minutes of conversation from your brains if you want, okay? It doesn't matter. Okay. Yep, did it work for you?
Delete.
Yeah. Okay, excellent. Okay. No. So any other questions on any of that? So I'll put that code somewhere where you can find it tomorrow. I feel like I'm done for the day now. And don't leave without making sure I know who you are if you're not on the attendance sheet. Remember that I want you to add me to a Google Plus circle so that I can add you back. Remember that all of the information about this module is at colinmcit.blogspot.com. And remember that you need to make a Dropbox and share it with me. The details are on the blog as well, I believe. Yes, sir. That's gone. That's gone, yeah. Am I still a circle? I'm still one of your circles. Yeah, okay, that's fine. That's fine. I'll probably find you anyway. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Any other questions? Yeah. Any questions? Great stuff. Okay.